so much for inviting me to be here. To be the voice of every child, every innocent. They have a voice. They have a voice, and they have a right to be heard, loved, cared, and abused, not abused. My tragic family injustice happened over 25 years ago. None of my children were abused by any of the family members or by their mom or dad. But my children were abused at the hands of foster care, social workers, foster parents, this is my son, Muhammad Ali. All these bruises he came up with, sugar burns, marks, bruises. My daughter, my twin daughter, Samier, when they came in with the bruises and a crying to the worker at the juvenile visitation supervisor station, my children were called liars. By then, my children know how to speak English. Before, when they were taken, they spoke no English whatsoever. We were prevented to speak to them in the only language they knew how. We were told, the child, we need to know what he's saying to the children. I said, my children didn't have to speak your language to know that they are accused. I was told by the Department of Social Service, at least they're not dead. At least they're not dead. I said, what are you talking about? She said, yeah. She said, your daughter, your son, my 2-year-old, where we started being in the system, who died from an accidental fall. The state knew that my son had a brittle bone disease. The Wayne County Medical Examiner Office destroyed my son's autopsy records. I was charged 2 months later of killing my son. The medical examiner of Wayne County testified before a jury back in 1986. I was acquitted by his own testimony 15 minutes after he testified. He said that my son's injury, there is no way it could have happened, just a fall, accidental fall in a bathtub. He's not given a hypothetical theory. My son did not have a scratch on him, didn't have a bruise on him, didn't have anything. To find out later after my acquittal, I should have gotten my kids back, and then the state, they said, no, you should not have your kids back until you admit you killed your son. I refused, and then I had a child 4 months later. They stole her, kidnapped her from the hospital at 1 day old. To find out later, after all of this going, 10 years later, losing all my rights because I did not admit killing my son. We have evidence that the state conspired with the therapist, with anybody, they wanted to say that we're unfit. Those people testified that not even one person said that we're unfit. My children were brainwashed to believe that their brother was killed by me, and the state had to protect them to be taken away. We went through the appeals, we fought day and night. When my children, their cries, their voice were stripped away, I promised them. I said, no matter what, how long it's going to take, Mom and Dad, you were going to make sure your voices can be heard. Ten years later, watching Kelly and Company, back in the 90s, where I saw a family going through the same thing of us. Their child had a brittle bone disease, copper deficiency, went through the same thing as my twin son. We got hold of them, we got their contacts. while us as a parent were prevented to get any records from the hospitals, anything. This parent, who is not a relative, who doesn't know anything, just called in the hospital, says, do you have a record on the Amer children? They said yes. He called me up and he says, we have, just go, then tell them that your name is Rehab, Amer, get those records. I went to children's hospitals, to open hospitals. I got records on my kids except the skull x-rays that would indicate of the fracture. Then those records went to a world-renowned expert that clearly stated that Samier, my son, had a breathable disease. Not only that, my son was tested, and the test came positive. The state workers prevented us from getting those results. Even when I asked, I want my baby, when she was born, I want her to be tested, even they prevented the doctors, the hospital, to have my baby to be tested for breathable disease. Now we have evidence to prove that my son had a breathable disease. And that's how the medical examiner could not clearly justify his classification of homicide when there is no physical evidence or trauma, internal or external, to the body to say that this was a force, a blunt force. Now we'll go back to the court in 1995, 1996. Before Judge Amy Hathaway, she overlooked our evidence and she said we have overwhelming evidence to believe that Samier had a breathable disease. The state, the prosecutor, the Department of Social Service claimed that, Your Honor, it's not in the best interest of the children to believe other than what we told them, because we took them to therapy for over 7 years to believe that their mother had killed their brother. So it's in their best interest to believe that their brother was killed, because they live fine right now and happy. If you tell them otherwise, they won't have a trust in the system. I mean, how as a parent would clearly believe any child has interest to believe that their brother was killed? I thought it was in my children's best interest to grow up with me, believing I killed their brother when that judge ordered me. She said, we have just said that you killed your son. You have 3 children, 2-year-old, 5-year-old, and 6-year-old. Outside that courtroom you will get him. I was 20 years old. I said, I fear only one judge. She said, yes, I am. I said, no. I said, a judge, God, the creator of heaven and earth, who witnessed me, who is my judge. I'm not going to have my children under the circumstances that for me to raise them and for them to grow up with fear of me. They won't be in my children's best interest. And now my children brainwashed to believe that their brother was killed, and that was in their best interest not to know the truth. Even though Judge Amy Hathaway disagreed with their analogy, but they told her, Your Honor, you cannot reopen the case. You have no jurisdiction because our kids were adopted. I said, what is the adoption has to do with justice? My children, they need to be set free. They have a right to have a normal life, whether they are with me or with anybody else's. You cannot sentence my children to a lifetime of nightmare and believe it's in their best interest. As a parent, I don't believe that's in a child's best interest to believe and to go through a long life of nightmare. And we lost all our legal rights to win our kids back because of so-called adoption. I was told when they're 18, we can at least get to see them. And all of a sudden, the media, our case was nationwide, high profile, and I started getting calls from people who were about my children, teachers, neighbors, how my children are being abused at that home, how they are afraid to be outside. They were told that if you show your being outside, that your parents is gonna come and kill you the way they killed your brother. I just said, what needs to be done. When my son turned 18, I got through a friend, a teacher, sent him a calling card, birthday card, and pictures of all of our visits with our kids to remember us. Instead of my son calling me, a sheriff from Oakland County called me and wanted to arrest me for sending pictures so my kids won't forget me or their dad, and we just want them to know the truth. The media got hold of it and they spoke with the sheriff and they said, yeah, because the foster adopted mother, she doesn't want the family to have anything to do with them. They say, well, the child is 18 years old and has a right to know his family. But by then, my children are brainwashed to believe that God saved them. It was in their best interest to be what they had. Then my twin daughter, the second one, I saw her in 2001, then because of the media pressure, we were allowed to see our kids. By God's grace, my children remembered me. My baby wife saw her when she was 2 years old. The last time I saw her this time, she was 15 years old. And she did remember me. At the same time, she was afraid. Then visits were cut. It's like you go back and forth in the system. And then my twin daughter said to me that she would never get on with her life until she dies and goes to heaven. And me and her twin brother to tell her what really had happened to her. Because her adopted mother put a question in her head that you were never gonna know the truth until you meet your brother. Because the idea of breeder-born disease, the foster adopted mother, she did not accept it. And when my kids accepted it, she put this in her head, so my children now, they're not accepting it. Back in 2002, I told my husband, we need to do something, really something. Why is it you questioning the fact, why these records are missing? Why the skull x-ray that states that my son's injury was so severely, it's missing. Why is it the medical examiners, Wayne County, destroyed my son's autopsy records? What's there that they don't want us to find out? It doesn't make any sense, and it doesn't need an expert for you to know there's something's wrong with that picture. Then we exhausted all of our legal means to go back to court. I called attorneys to see if I need a court order or something to exhume my son's body after burying him for 17 years. She says you have to get a court order, and she gave me a runaround. I said, and I went and took another step to call the funeral home, the directory, and then he says, your son had died, you buried him 17 years ago, why you need to do this? I said, for my kids. I said, they need to be set free. I said, those people destroyed the records. I believe in a higher power who preserves and will send a message. It took a permit, a simple permit, and a pathologist who's willing, a medical examiner, to test and exhume my son's body. I remember Dr. Warner Spitz. Dr. Warner Spitz, he told me, your son was only 2 years old, you're not gonna find nothing. I said, are you willing, when I have my son exhumed, to look at my son? Because I have a feeling that the hospitals, Wayne County Medical destroyed, God would preserve. He agreed. We got a permit on September the 17th of 2002. I and my husband and the 3 funeral directors went. We exhumed our son. My son was preserved. To speak out and to cry from the grave for every child out there. He cried for his twin sister. He cried for his brothers and my younger daughter. He cried for me. Let the whole world that I did not harm my son. When the state took away my children's innocence and their voice, I became their voice. And my voice and my cries were never heard. God preserve my son, my beloved Samier. He was examined and preserved, and to find out it was a hairline fracture. It could never happen other than an accidental fall, and because of his brutal disease. The state knew that. Why did they destroy my children and so many other kids out there just for the sake of a mistake? A child is a human being, it's not a piece of object. To remove from a loving family and to expect him to be okay, to brainwash them to believe abuse is God's love. My children were abused and they told it because God loved you. Now my children, two of my daughters are still brainwashed, not accepting the fact. My older son, he started coming around to believe, he started remembering things, says, Mom, they kept telling me that you murdered my brother. Somehow in my heart, I could not believe it, but they got me to fear you. Then we went back to the court. By God's grace, after 22 years later, my son's death certificate got amended to state his death was classified accidental, not homicide. After 22 years later, Judge Edward Thomas, he said he's been in the court as a judge for 27 years. He said he hasn't seen a case like the Amers. It was literally misconduct of injustice that they made kidnapping. They legalized kidnapping when it came into my kids. He told me if your children were really under the age 18 that he himself would go get my kids. But they're adults, it's on their own, it has to be their choice. That with the death certificate being amended to state it wasn't accidental, that did not bring my kids home, nor they accepted the fact that this is the truth. So we know our kids were brainwashed. CNN interviewed my kids. John Manny called me and he says, we have your children are brainwashed. And I told my husband, with all of what we've gone through, maybe we need to do something. What else do we need? I said, I don't know. Our baby wasn't preserved for nothing. My kids, they're not afraid. But by God's grace, I would never, with His guidance and help, have another child, Faith, be put and sentenced as of my children. With lots of prayers and sleepless nights, I and my husband sat down, we drafted the legislature of the Amer bill. I put down everything, what happened within the laws and what did not happen, what I think as a parents for child fosters. There is no laws that protects our kids. Their law protects criminals. Their laws that protects abusers, but to protect the innocence of our kids, they have no voice, no rights, and they're not allowed to be heard. In 2005, we drafted the legislature. We stuck with it for 5 years. Everyone said it's never going to go through. I said it will go through. Because a message from above, by preserving my son, a message says that to preserve all other innocents out there. We took that and we fought it till December the 14th of 2010. Jennifer Granholm signed it into a law where a child is being taken away from their parents, the priority is placed with their familiar surroundings to protect all fundamental rights of all faith. Doesn't matter who you are, where you come from, a child's identity has a right to be intact. No one has a right to strip that child's rights away. He has a voice, he has a right, and for sure, those rights need to be preserved. And now I can say to my beloved son, hush, little baby, don't you cry. Mama and Papa heard you cry. May you rest in peace in heaven, my precious angel. Your voice touched every child out there. Pray to God the Almighty that touches your sisters and your brothers to know that God is all about love, not about abuse. Thank you so much for listening. Thank you so much for being here. God bless you with all what you want to do. Thank you so much, Suzanne.